So, Senator, midterms coming up, 3 weeks actually from right now. They say that there are three critical states for the Senate, and they are the Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Nevada. Do you agree with that? And what are your chances?
I think those are absolutely three critical states. I think, both Senator Warnock and Senator Cortez Masto, I believe are going to be okay. And I think, the Fetterman-Oz race, a lot will depend upon the October 25th debate. But I like my Democrats' chances in all three, and there are still some sleeper states, the Wisconsins, the North Carolinas, that may ultimately be in play as well.
So let's talk about Ukraine. A lot of news coming out of Ukraine continuing, not all of it good, with the drone attacks now we understand, allegedly because of Iranian supply drones. What do we know about those?
Well, first of all, it's a telling comment that the Russians have used up so much of their munitions that they're actually turning to Iran and North Korea to buy additional armaments. And the Iranian-Russian agenda, well, shouldn't be totally surprised. You've got Iranian government that's literally murdering children, oftentimes young girls, in their streets as they push back against that authoritarian regime. You have hundreds of thousands of military-aged men leaving Russia in drones because of Putin's call-up. I think Putin is on his back foot militarily and even within Russia, but clearly these drones are having some effect in terms of taking out Ukrainian infrastructure. So making sure the president released another $700 million of military aid, a lot of that will be ground-to-air systems that can try to take out some of these drones.
That's my question, actually. Do we have, what degree of confidence do we have that anything we could supply actually could take out the drones?
I think this is very much an evolving subject. I don't think we have a determinative answer today. We have seen ground-to-air activities take down some of the Russian missile strikes. The drones, both in terms of the Russians' use of the Iranian drones and the Ukrainians' use of the Turkish drones, have really introduced a whole new field, and how we take those out is still being played out.
There's another element that's being introduced right now, which is Belarus, sort of back in the fray. Is that a real threat?
Listen, if I was the Belarusian leader, who, remember, there was a major people revolution against him about 2 years ago, if he actually sends Belarusian troops into this conflict, I'm not sure his government's long-term prognosis is very good, and I think there's a real question whether the Belarusian troops would even, follow those orders.
Is there any question of the congressional support for the United States continuing and even expanding support of Ukraine? Is this bipartisan? Is it steadfast?
It is bipartisan to date. Close to 90 senators, overwhelmingly bipartisan. I do fear that there is this Trump-led America alone contingent that could have greatly increased power in the House, and a Republican House next year could undermine that support, and that would be bad. That would be bad for the Ukrainians. It would be bad for our unity with NATO. It would be bad for the world stage, because if Putin sees that kind of isolationist approach, he will press that advantage.
One of the things, Senator, you've been very active in, you've worked hard on, is the aspect of national security as it affects Chinese technology. We have new export control restrictions now being put into place by the administration. Do they go far enough? On the other hand, are you worried about possible retaliation?
Well, I think what woke me up to this was years ago, and I was in the telecom business before I went into politics, was the Chinese company Huawei dominating the wireless field in 5G. We stepped up against that. We then stepped up against the semiconductor domination, where we had used to dominate the field, and now China, and we get our most advanced semiconductors from Taiwan, national security issue. I do think the long-term issue of this century is technology competition with China, and what, as chairman of the Intelligence Committee, I'm working on in a bipartisan way is what other areas do we need to make sure that China doesn't win the technology race? We're looking now at synthetic biology and advanced energy in all its different domains.
Are there things we are doing or should be doing to encourage expansion beyond Taiwan, for example, of production of some of these very sophisticated chips? Because we're vulnerable given the disputes right now over the Taiwan Strait.
The irony is, in the year that the Senate first passed the CHIPS bill, before it got to the president's desk a year later, virtually every other major country in the world has stepped up with their own CHIPS investment program. So if we had not passed the CHIPS bill, we would never build another American chip manufacturer ever again. So This is happening with countries around the world, many of them allies. Our European friends are doing more. South Korea is doing a lot more. Japan's putting additional incentive in place. But we do need to make sure that we are not reliant on either Taiwan or China. And China's potential to take on Taiwan or to even have an economic blockade of the export of semiconductor chips would be devastating, not just to our economy, but to the world economy.
One of the big issues, obviously, facing the nation is inflation. And the reaction to inflation from the Federal Reserve, you know what's going on in the markets. And there's a lot of people who are very concerned about it. Are there things that Congress could be doing to help the inflation situation?
I think in the short term, it's tough to turn on a dime. The Fed is trying to navigate this with raising interest rates without throwing us totally into a recession. I do think we have to be, if you look back to the analogy of what happened with Volcker in the 70s and 80s, I'm not sure it fully works because each time the Fed raises interest rates now, we've got $32 trillion of national debt, and that adds another $200 billion a year of government spending for every 1 point the interest rates go up. So Fed's got to worry about sending us into a recession, but also driving government spending off the cliff. At the same time, we do need to acknowledge that the Fed waited too long to start this process.
Hindsight's 2020, but do you have any regrets at all about the American Rescue Plan? Because the Fed may be too late, but Congress was pretty early with a lot of stimulus.
Was there too much in the American Rescue Plan on a relative basis? Absolutely. But let's remember that if you look at the $5 trillion that the federal government put into the economy during COVID, 80 cents on every dollar was spent on President Trump. Now, I voted for all that, so I'm not critical. I am thinking virtually all of this legislation, if I had to do it over again, I would do it because the potential of unraveling of the economy due to COVID, we just didn't know where we were headed. And I don't think the marginal couple $100 billion of spend that came out of the American Rescue Plan, that has not been the sole driving force. And the other bills that we passed, the infrastructure bill, the CHIPS bill, the Inflation Reduction Act in terms of clean energy, those dollars have not even hit the economy yet. So I don't think they are the primary causes of this, of the current inflation factors.
But the broader point, I think I'm hearing you say, is whoever was responsible for it, whether it was President Trump or President Biden or a combination of the two, there was too much fiscal stimulus in retrospect.
In retrospect. But when you were looking at an economy that was fully shut down, it's ironic to me that some of my small business friends who are now saying, darn it, you guys spent too much, were exactly the same people who were saying, you guys didn't do another round of PPP, small business funding, or you need to send out more additional checks to all Americans. So, you know, folks have, again, everybody can be accused of this, and those of us in politics have the same thing. Got some short memories about what they were for before they were against it.